All right, so now that we've created all of the pages for our application so far and set up routes for them, the next thing we're going to do is go into our notes page and actually implement the notes list. So let's close the rest of these components for now. And the first thing here is that this notes page is going to have to take some props. Now, eventually we'll replace this with using context or something like that, but for the time being, we'll just say notes page and pass in a prop called notes. Okay, so this will basically be all of the notes that the user has created in this application. All right, and now that we have those notes, we're going to want to display a list here of those notes. And what that's going to look like, we're just going to use the map function like you've seen before. And here, we just need to wrap this all in a React fragment first. And we're going to say notes.map, and for each note, we're going to display a few elements. Now, first of all, let's talk about what the notes in our application are going to look like data-wise. Okay, so our notes are just going to be simple JSON objects, and they're going to have a few properties. The first property, which most resources are going to have in our application, is going to be the notes ID, and this will just be a unique identifier of some kind that allows us to uniquely identify that note. Notes are also going to have a title property, which will be obviously the title, right? So it'll be something like my first note. And notes will also have a content property. And this is going to be basically a markdown string that will contain all of the actual text that the user has added for that note. All right, and that's pretty much all of the data that our notes are going to need for now. Obviously, when we get into sharing later on, we'll have to add some more data to each note accordingly, but for now, this should do nicely. So keeping that in mind, that structure that we just defined, what we're going to do is for each note in this notes list, we're going to display a div, and this div will have the key of note.id, right? Because that's a unique string that we can use to identify each of these list items we're displaying. That's something we discussed a long time ago when we were first learning how to display lists in React. And inside this div, what we're going to do, we're going to display the note's title as an H3 heading. So for this, we'll say note.title. Now, under that, we're going to display the number of words in the note. All right, now, this is just a fun little feature to get an idea of how long that note is, and we're not going to implement it in the most foolproof way. What we're going to do is just split the content by spaces and figure out how many segments that gives us. All right, so what that's going to look like, we're just going to say paragraph, we're going to say note.content.split, okay, and we're going to split it by a space, and we're going to say .length, and that should give us the number of words, so to speak, in our note. Now, just to keep things clean, what I am going to do for this is actually create a helper function, so we'll say const get word count, and that's going to take a string and simply do the logic that we had here, right? So it'll be return string.split by a space and .length. And also we're going to want to say if the string doesn't exist, we'll just return 0. Okay, so in other words, if there is no content, we want to return 0 instead of trying to split the string, since that won't work. All right, so now we can just say, instead of having this logic inside of here, which is kind of ugly, we're just going to say get word count note.content. And after that, we're going to say words with the little S in parentheses thing, signifying that that might just be one word. All right, so we have our note title, we have our note content. One more thing we're going to do here is we're going to add a link to that page. And to do that, we're going to use React Router DOM's link component, which was just imported for me automatically with the wrong quotation marks here. Hang on a second, and I'll fix that. There we go. And this is going to be a link to the corresponding note detail page for a given note. So the way that we're going to do that, we're going to say link to, and we're going to add in the curly braces here, use a backtick string and say /notes/ and we're going to insert the notes ID into that URL we're linking to, right? So that'll take the user to note/123 if that's the note that they're currently viewing, for example. All right, and then inside here, just for show, we're going to have a button that says view. And that'll be the button that the user can click to go to the detail page for that note. All right, so to test this out, what we're going to do is we're going to open up our application. Looks like everything's running fine. We're going to go to our notes page, and if we refresh, it looks like we don't have any notes yet, right? So we need to actually define some notes and pass them into our notes page. Now, the way we can do that is inside our routes file, we're going to define some fake notes by saying const fake notes. And what these will look like, it'll be an array of objects. Each of those objects is going to have an ID, as we said. It'll have a title, which will say something like my first note. And the content here is going to be markdown. So we'll say something like, hello, my dear friends. Inside these asterisk things, which as you'll see will make them italic when we actually set up our app to display markdown appropriately. All right, so that's our fake notes. What we're going to do is pass them into our notes page from our routes component by saying fake notes equals, or not fake notes, we want notes equals fake notes. There we go. And that should do it. Let's go back to our application now and see if this is working. Sure enough, we see my first note displayed, 4 words, and if we click view, that'll take us directly to the corresponding note detail page for that note. All right, now one last thing that we can do here. At this point, once I've gotten a page looking good, what I usually like to do is see where I can break out things into a separate component. Because as I mentioned before, this notes list that we're displaying here, we're eventually going to want there to be 2 lists like this on our notes page. One for displaying the notes that the user has created. Right, so that'll have all of the notes underneath it. And one for displaying all of the notes that were shared with the user. So it'll be something like shared with me, and it'll have the same list underneath it. Now, in order to make sure we don't have to write all of this logic that we wrote here again, we're going to create a separate component called, I don't know, we'll probably call it notes list, that will be able to take care of all of that logic for us. Okay, so what that's going to look like, let's open up our file browser here, and inside the source directory, I'm going to create a new folder, which I'll call components. All right, this is going to contain the reusable components for our application that are not pages. And inside here, what we're going to do is say new file. We're going to call this component noteslist.js. And inside here, we're going to say export const notes list equals, and this is going to take notes as a prop. And basically what we're going to do is just copy and paste all of this logic that we just had in here into our notes list. So to do that, we'll just have to say return. We'll have to put in React fragments to make sure that the curly braces are interpreted correctly here. And that should be all we need to do. So let's swap out this logic here with our notes list component that we just created. We're going to say import notes list from components notes list. Oops, there we go. And we'll display our notes list and pass the notes as a prop. So we'll say notes equals notes, and we're just kind of passing through that prop that our own notes page got. And we'll also have to cut out this get word count, put that in notes list. We'll just paste that there. And we'll do the same thing with the link component, which we're no longer using inside our notes page. We're just going to copy that and put it in notes list. Okay, and let's delete that extra space there. And if we go back to our browser now, everything should look exactly the same as before, except now we have this expressed as a reusable component. So in the future, if we wanted to display another list, right? If we open up our notes page again here, if we wanted to say h1 shared with me and display another notes list with different notes, I'm just going to display the same notes here, but this would be, you know, a different set of notes, obviously. What we would see is that with just one component, we've displayed the same layout and logic. So that's something that I usually like to follow up with whenever I create a page, as you'll see. So anyway, that's how we create the notes page. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.